Hi there, and welcome to the Indie Pop Girl, the podcast where you will find music chat, new releases, hidden gems, and nostalgic deep dives. I am back with another episode in my Throwback Friday series, and for this week I have picked an album which has completely been forgotten and wasn't well received upon release, and I think it's time that I show the record some love. And I'll be discussing Neapolis by Simple Minds from 1998. This hidden gem deserves a second chance, so I'm going to take you through it track by track and explore why it's so overlooked. Neapolis was released on the 16th of March 1998 and was their first release through Chrysalis in the UK, following being released from their contract with Virgin Records. It was a complete reinvention from their previous release, Good News from the Next World, which leaned more on guitars and less on keyboards. Neapolis saw the band return to their electronic experimental roots and moved away from stadium rock and concentrated on textures, synths and a more melodic approach with hypnotic rhythmic grooves. The album also saw the return of bassist Derek Forbes and drummer Mal Gaynor, who is only credited on one song on the record, but later joined them for some live dates. The record was produced by Charlie Burchill and Pete Walsh, which I think was a smart move at the time, as Pete was responsible for producing their breakthrough New Gold Dream back in 1982, which was critically acclaimed. The production on New Gold Dream is just so warm and full of texture, and I was excited to hear how Neapolis would sound. And back in 1998, I didn't realise it at the time, but nearly 30 years later, you could say that New Gold Dream and Neapolis have this thematic, spiritual connection to each other. But unfortunately, Neapolis just didn't have the critical acclaim, big hits, attention, or the momentum that New Gold Dream had. So, what went wrong? If you are listening and are a fan of Simple Minds, you might be wondering, why have I picked this album? And that is a good question. When I was planning this Throwback Friday series before my podcast was launched, the goal was to include records that didn't have the attention or love upon first release. And you could say that is valid for Good News for the Next World or even Cry. And I did think about both of them as well for this series, but obviously I can only pick one here. And after much thought, I thought that Neapolis is the one that ticks all the boxes. The album did chart poorly and received mixed reviews, but that doesn't mean it is a bad record by any means. Chrysalis did provide Simple Minds with a large promotional campaign, so they obviously had some faith in the record and the band, and they even appeared on several TV shows in the UK during primetime slots to provide more exposure, but they still fell under the radar. You might not have been around in 1998, and maybe you are aware of Simple Minds now, or maybe you are discovering their discography, which is impressive, by the way. And I don't think many people outside of the fandom know that this record exists. So see this episode of me spreading awareness about this record, because I think to me that it's a cult classic. Just to bring in a bit of context before I go into the tracks, I became a fan of Simple Minds in early 1995, and they are the first band I saw live. Of course, I was aware of them previously throughout the 80s and all the big hits, but I didn't explore their discography properly until 1995 during the Good News from the Next World era. So waiting 3 years for the next record to land didn't really seem that much of a gap, as I was listening and discovering other things in the meantime and getting up to speed with the rest of Simple Minds' discography. At the time when I was 15 in 1995, when it was time to explore the early part of their discography, it was quite jarring. When I mention Simple Minds or talk to people about them, they usually are aware of the big hits and that song from the Breakfast Club. But when you dig much deeper, they are much more than that. I don't think many are aware of their experimental phase in the late 70s and early 80s when they were searching for their identity. And the stadium rock thing is just a very small portion of their discography. And when you dig deeper into the albums and find the deep cuts, you realise how experimental Simple Minds actually are. If you are aware of their more successful albums such as Sparkle in the Rain or Once Upon a Time, you are not going to find them in Neapolis' sound at all. The stadium rock is completely put aside here, and it's funny because when Simple Minds ventured into stadium rock and went all political, they still received criticism from the press. So whatever Simple Minds do, sometimes it just doesn't hit or satisfy the public. I know some of the more later records have a similar sound, combining the synth pop with guitar-driven instrumentation, and although I enjoy some of the cuts from their stadium rock phase, and I might be in the minority here, but my preference with Simple Minds is when they go, well, a bit weird. Yes, Jim Kerr's lyrics can be a bit off the wall and abstract at times, and Neapolis is no exception, and sometimes you are left scratching your head, but if you just put that to one side and lose yourself in the sounds and the production, it can be very rewarding, and if you don't click with the first listen, you will find that the songs will just creep upon you and end up being very addictive. There was a time when Simple Minds became a bit unfashionable, and the press gave them a bit of stick calling them U2 copycats. But to me, Simple Minds have always had their own sound and identity. And when James Dean Bradfield of the Manic Street Preachers is talking about how influential Empires and Dance and Sons and Fascination is to their Futurology record, this really confirms that Simple Minds are something special. I would be lying if I said that I absolutely love everything that they put out, because I want to be honest in these episodes and say to you guys if something isn't to my taste. And I could have easily picked one of their more well-known albums to talk about, but I wanted to pick the one which I believe is underrated, gone completely under the radar, and because of the poor reception Neapolis received back in 1998, I believe more people should know that this record exists. And if you have heard this and think, what a load of shit, what is she talking about? Just hang on, because there was a period when I really fell out of love with this record, but gradually over time I kept revisiting it, and I just think it was released at the wrong time. I love it when a record can prove you wrong and has staying power nearly 30 years later. And my love and appreciation for Neapolis was confirmed when the album was released on vinyl for the very first time during Record Store Day in 2023. So when it was time for Neapolis to be released, I was very excited and loved the first single, Glitterball, which did appear on VH1 UK on regular rotation, which I was very happy about because it's such a great video and probably one of their best. I was excited about the change in direction and the possibility of a tour, especially with Derek Forbes back, and this era was just set up to be a good one. But unfortunately, behind the scenes, the band was plagued with record company trouble, lineup changes, and it all had a negative effect. Looking back on this record nearly 30 years later, and how my music taste has evolved in my later years, I honestly think Neapolis was ahead of its time. It certainly doesn't sound like a product of 1998, And I think the production is so forward thinking for the time. I still think it sounds fresh after all this time, and the texture and layers in the production is some of the best and strongest in their discography. As I have mentioned in previous episodes, I will not be playing clips of the songs, so if you are curious, then please support the artists I cover by streaming, downloading, or buying physical copies. Thank you. Track 1, Song for the Tribes. Well, just from the intro alone, you know that this is going to be more experimental, and this track uses acoustic guitar from Charlie, which is really effective, as the production is slightly stripped back a bit and Jim's vocals are front and centre. I also think the use of his background vocals in this song just adds to another dimension within the production and the instrumental. And he kind of uses his voice like an instrument, which I really appreciate. The strings that come in is really effective, and overall, I think the sound and the production of this track is just really unique in their discography. The electronic elements combined with Charlie Burchell's subtle electric guitar that just comes in when needed just sounds so good on the ears. It's stripped back but lush and full at the same time, and this won't be the first time that I mention it here, but the praise must be given to Pete and Charlie on this one because I think the production is so impressive. This might be an unpopular opinion, but they really need to do more songs like this. The song is quite unusual. It's the opening track. As Simple Minds usually give us a proper upbeat banger to open up their records, but I really respect the artistic decision here, and it works for me. The lyrics were written amongst the British general election on the eve of Tony Blair's triumphant election result for Labour in the UK in 1997, and I was surprised during my research into this episode that this song has never been played live. So boys, if you're hearing this, please add this into the future set lists. Track 2, Glitterball. So this is the lead single, and I will be honest, I do prefer the single mix of this, but the album version is still really effective. Again, it's more electronic, and the drum beat is quite harsh on this when it comes in with Charlie's guitar, but it's mixed in so well with the intro, just giving you more layers with the impressive production. There are live drums in the mix, but it's quite subtle, and within the layers you've got Jim's vocal performance, which is quite understated here, but I really love the effects on his background vocals, and it's just really effective in the overall mix. The song is very atmospheric and experimental at the same time, but this track is everything that I love about Simple Minds when they create songs like this. I don't like using this description, but the bass is just chef's kiss, and it is classic Derek Forbes. And I will say one thing, that Derek Forbes is one of my favourite bass players of all time. He is so underrated and he doesn't get enough love or attention. Their early work with his bass runs are just so amazing. Yeah, I just think it works so well in this song, and I love all of his work. And if you are curious, do check out Derek Forbes with Propaganda. Again, just some really great songs and some classic bass playing. The outro on this is just an absolute slay. I absolutely adore how they just close it out. And talking about the video, it was filmed at the Guggenheim Museum in Bilbao, Spain. And I think it was probably one of the first videos or the first to be filmed there. I just love it so much, and it's so atmospheric with Jim in the car, and then you see them walking looking quite mean and moody. I just think it just adds to the atmosphere of the song. And when the video dropped, I was just so, so pleased seeing Derek in a video after all this time and after such a long absence. Track 3, War Babies. So this is the follow-up single, and if you have not heard the Dave Bascom remix of the single, then do check it out, because I think he did such a wonderful job at enhancing this track, and that is my preference when I listen to this song. But the album version still works for me in the context of the record. Again, Charlie using his electric guitar more like texture and layers instead of going for big solos. If you have heard Charlie's work in the New Gold Dream album, then you will know what I mean. He's not doing anything flashy, or he's not flexing here. He's going for layers in atmosphere, and I really appreciate that. The drummers are more prominent in this one, and Derek's bass just complements everything perfectly. I remember hearing this during their Rock Palast performance in Germany during the festival tour before the album came out. And I caught this performance on TV on a German channel, and I heard this song for the first time, and I was so excited hearing new music, and I didn't know at the time. Then the camera just panned to the stage, and I realised that Derek was back, and I was just thinking, what the fuck is going on? What is happening? I was just so overwhelmed by seeing them again and new music, and the fact that Derek was back was just absolutely incredible. And yeah, that was a moment that I'll never forget. The outro on this is just so good, and I love how they progress the songs on this record and just let the instrumentation just do its thing. I would say that out of all of them, this is probably the most commercial sounding song on the record, and it became a live fan favourite, and it's definitely one of mine. Track 4, Tears of a Guy. So the intro to this is completely electronic, and I'm here for it. Charlie comes in very subtly but doesn't take over the track. The bass is so good in this, and I just want to give a shout out to Charlie Burchill, because he is so underrated as not only as a guitarist, a songwriter and a producer. He is also a multi-instrumentalist, playing guitar, he plays keyboards and synths, he also plays the violin and saxophone. He is just amazing all round, and he's just got an amazing attention to detail. He just does not get enough credit as far as I'm concerned. I see all these lists of the best guitarists and all of that, and I never see Charlie mentioned anywhere. It's a bit criminal, really, how he just does not receive any attention. And I've seen Simple Minds live a few times now, and Charlie is honestly one of the best guitarists I've ever seen live. He just knows when to come in, and he knows when to pull back, and he just complements everything just perfectly, and he's got a real eye for detail, and I think that's how he works so well as a producer as well. He's just got that gift, I guess. And Yeah, he definitely should get more credit because I will be a Charlie fangirl forever and I will die on that hill. The production is so ahead of its time on this song, and yeah, I kind of sound like a bit of a stuck record here, but I'm just telling it like it is, and it does not sound like something that's stuck in the 90s. It sounds very fresh to me. Jim's vocals are a bit more passionate here, a bit more of a classic Jim vocal in places, but it all, everything, all of the elements just work together perfectly. The synth melody that runs through the song is really effective as well, and I would say that this deep cut is well worth your time because, like I said, it just does not scream 90s to me. I think Pete and Charlie were thinking way ahead here, and the mixing of Jim's vocals, the electronics, the live instrumentation is just so perfectly balanced. This track is definitely a vibe. Track 5, Superman v Super Soul. So we take a bit of a turn here, and this album track is very experimental. It's got like a tribal Middle Eastern vibe with the drums and the percussive rhythm. This one is quite difficult to put into words because it's so unique, but I love what Jim does with his voice on this one. The effects on his background vocals give a haunting quality, and the overall texture is quite overwhelming but in a good way. All the weird sounds within the layer of the song just all work in harmony. And if you want to check out Charlie as a guitarist, listen to this song and you will know what I mean by using it so subtly and not going for flashy solos. That shit is hard to do, and he deserves respect as a talented musician. His attention to detail on this record, like I've already said, is just the next level. There's a great outro with the use of effects on Jim's vocals. It took me a while to grasp the lyrics on this one, but I sensed some sort of spiritual inspiration, which could have been the muse of Jim's lyrics. I think Jim is hinting at a struggle or a dialogue between physical strength and inner depth. I could be completely off the mark, but that is just my interpretation of it. And the spirituality is reflected in the track's instrumental and atmosphere with the hypnotic groove. I would say that this track with Song for the Tribes is very unique in the Simple Minds discography, both quite abstract in structure, and I feel this is one of Simple Minds' greatest strengths, and not to go for conventional song structure. Track 6, Lightning. So we've got more experimentation with this track, but this time it's much heavier with the live drums. And I love that they use electronic drums, which are quite harsh, and then they kind of fade in and out. This one, again, is really unique, and Jim just goes for it vocally. Probably my favourite vocal performance on the entire record. Charlie just coming in with a little riff here and there, it just sounds so good. And on headphones, this track is perfectly balanced because in someone else's hands, this could have sounded like a complete disaster. But what Pete and Charlie manage on the production is quite extraordinary. How they manage to blend the harsh with the soft, and not at any point does Jim sound drowned out. Well, to me, he doesn't. This is the kind of shit I love from Simple Minds. Just fucking go for it and bring in those big synths and the big drums and be a bit bombastic. But it's catchy as hell at the same time. And I absolutely love the outro with Jim's vocal runs and ad-libs. It's just amazing. Track 7, If I Had Wings. So we slow things down a bit, and Can I call this a ballad? I think it is. It's got beautiful production and all the sounds here are just so lovely, with the great bass coming in. Classic Charlie guitar. He goes a bit heavier here and you can definitely feel his presence in the track, but it's all balanced out perfectly, and Jim's vocals become more passionate as the song progresses. The breakdown where the synths and the strings come in, it all opens up and it sounds so heavenly, and the drumming on this track is so great, really understated with the percussion. And I keep saying it, everything on this record to me is mixed so well with care and attention to detail. I feel like this track is kind of related to Superman v Super Soul, like a continuation, as I feel the lyrics on this track are quite spiritual as well. I would love to know the inspiration behind Jim's lyrics on this record, because like I mentioned earlier, Jim can get a bit abstract at certain points and it's not always that obvious what he is saying. But this could also be a callback to their earlier work, which definitely requires a bit of thinking. Track 8, Killing Andy Warhol. I am not sure if I am correct in saying that this has classic Simple Minds sound, but it's still experimental in nature with the electronic instrumentation. I would say that the lyrics are more straightforward here, as Jim is describing Andy Warhol and his influence on art culture, which as a result had an influx of arty wannabes and lookalikes during that period, and the sound of this track just works so well. I love how the song progresses and the instrumentation just changes slightly. The synths are placed a bit higher in the mix and then the harsh beat over it, but it still doesn't drown out Jim. You can still hear him loud and clear. The outro on this is just incredible. The little stabs of horns that come in is just so creative, and it kind of reminds me of Kick It In from Street Fighting years, that chaotic production, but it all works. A real pat on the back to Pete and Charlie again. Just great work, guys. I absolutely love Charlie's riff that closes out the track. It is classic Charlie Burchill, and listening to this song again and in this riff, it reminds me of early stuff like Scar from 1979's Reel to Reel Cacophony. Fuck me, I've only just realised now that Neapolis has this little callbacks to their earlier material, and I never realised that at the time listening to it. Maybe at that point I was still kind of getting to grips with the early part of their discography, and like I said, it is quite jarring in places, but I've kind of sat with the discography now for 30 years, so I am kind of used to the sounds now, and yeah, it's quite staggering actually how much this record does refer back to their early work. That to me is just fucking genius. Track 9, Androgyny. So we have an instrumental to close out the record, and Simple Minds are known for including an instrumental on their records, especially during their experimental phase. I was a bit lukewarm on this back in 1998, but over time I have warmed up to it, and it does work in the context in the album to close everything out. Probably some of the most innovative production on the whole record. It is very synth heavy and it's got a real driving beat, and listening to this again in 2025, it really gave me Depeche Mode vibes. Something around the Ultra era, which came out a year before this. It just gave me that overall vibe. I'm not saying it sounds like it, but it just gave me that feel. The synth sound so good, and it doesn't sound dated whatsoever. And with the album being just 9 tracks, this just flies by. I love how Simple Minds went for quality and not quantity here, and it's the perfect length and it's the perfect end to the record. I just want to mention the vinyl of Neapolis that was released for Record Store Day just elevates this album even more. The detail and separation of the instruments and Jim's vocals just sound so good, and this album was made to be played on a good quality sound system. So if you don't have this in your collection, I really do recommend picking it up, because it's one of the best sounding records I have in my collection, and I'm always blown away just about how good it sounds each time I give it a spin. It kind of breaks my heart a little bit listening to this record again in 2025 and thinking about the awful time Simple Minds had. I think Neapolis has got this flop era label on it due to the poor performance, and it seems that the band itself is disillusioned with the record, which is a real shame. With the whirlwind of the record company trouble and all the other things I mentioned earlier, the tour never happened, and my dream of seeing Simple Minds live with Derek Forbes was shattered. Reading the critical mauling of Neapolis was hard to take, and there was a period when I gave this record a bit of a rest. Yes, I played it to death when it came out, and I probably just got tired of it over time, but having that gap just made me love and appreciate it more. I always think you have to make up your own mind with a record and not read too much what the critics have to say. That's just their opinion. You might be listening to this podcast and you think that this isn't for you or your cup of tea. And that's okay, but if you are listening to this and are curious, then Neapolis is a hidden gem in Simple Minds' vast discography. I dig it because, like I said, I gravitate towards their more experimental work, and that's something that just floats my boat. It's great hearing their big hits, and they are great songs that have stood the test of time, but for me, it is far more rewarding for me to listen to Neapolis or Empires and Dance. That is just my taste now, and Neapolis will always have a special place in my heart. I look back at 1998 very fondly, and I have great memories attached to that time and this record. And thank you, Simple Minds, for this reinvention of this cult classic, for the bold and cutting edge production and not following trends. Being inspired by Hansa period Bowie, krautrock, and the callbacks to their earlier work, where I believe is when Simple Minds were at their most creative and daring. Despite Jim saying that he is not a fan of the mixing on the record, I am going to politely disagree, and sometimes the artists always see errors in their work, and sometimes it's just translated differently to the listener, and I think this is the case with Neapolis. Simple Minds were not afraid to push the boundaries and chasing hits, and I really respect them for this interesting period in their career, and one that I look back with great affection. I mentioned the Manic Street Preachers earlier, who have been influenced by Simple Minds. And I love that James Dean Bradfield, I have seen several times, cite them as highly influential at a time when they were unfashionable. Franz Ferdinand have also taken inspiration from Simple Minds, especially with their early work, and you can hear this in Franz Ferdinand's self-titled debut. 1998 was very forward-thinking. Madonna's Ray of Light, version 2.0 from Garbage, Tori Amos's Choir Girl Hotel, Kylie's Impossible Princess, Mezzanine by Massive Attack, and Neapolis are all experimental, boundary-pushing, dabbling in electronica, and you could feel a shift changing. Just a year earlier, we had Ultra by Depeche Mode and Homogenic by Bjork, and you could feel that music was becoming more experimental. And although some hit with the critics and public at the time, and of course, some did not, but it's important to mention this as I think this period is so creative. A big giant leap from Britpop, which had died out by then. And I think 1998 is one of the strongest years in that decade. I was just blown away, release after release with these records, and the level of experimentation was off the scale. I loved that mainstream artists were just like, fuck it, let's get weird, and I applaud that. I would absolutely love it if Simple Minds decide to go down this route again, just to be a bit more experimental and throw everything at the wall. I think they are now in a place where they have nothing to prove. They are still touring very successfully and releasing albums, so you never know. So Jim and Charlie, if you ever hear this, then please give us a weird, batshit crazy experimental record again that the critics and the public would never expect. Thanks for tuning in to another episode in my Throwback Friday series. I hope you are enjoying the content so far, and there is more to come with the nostalgia. Please follow me on Instagram at the Indie Pop Girl, where I'll be creating more content and mini reviews. I'm also building up my reviews in AOTY, so come say hello and let's talk about the music that moves us so much. If you've enjoyed this episode, I'd love it if you could follow, share, or leave a review, as it helps other music lovers to find the show. I've also created a public Spotify playlist and added some of my favourite tracks from the artists that I've already covered. And as the episodes grow, I'll be adding more. So if you are curious with any of the artists and albums that I've covered, please give it a listen, and who knows, you might find a new discovery. I'll be back on Tuesday with a full review of the much anticipated album Virgin by Lorde, so stay tuned. Until then, I'm Rachel, the Indie Pop Girl. Thanks for listening, and I will see you next time.